Hi class, this is Bill Berry with our second video in our Intro to Programming in JavaScript topic. In the first video, we talked a bit about how languages got from what they look like in the early days of computing to today's high-level languages, and we also covered how compiled and interpreted languages work and discussed the fact that JavaScript falls into that latter category, that is the interpreted type language. This next video is going to cover more about JavaScript itself. I know that you're anxious to get started and see what programs are going to look like, so let's take a quick look at that. What are the tools? What's the workflow? And just make a very small program to just get you started with things. So let's jump forward to that, and we're going to go here. Here we go, writing our first JavaScript. So what do we need to do to make that happen? Let's take a quick look. First, what are the tools that you're going to need to do that? I'm not going to teach you a lot about HTML today, but enough to get you started. And then we're going to actually write a little hello JavaScript program, a little script, so that you can see how the whole thing works. So first of all, let's talk about the tools that you're going to need. You're going to need a browser for the purposes of verifying and seeing output from your script. I suggest Firefox. It has some tools that are kind of nice, but Chrome works. You can choose whatever you like. Internet Explorer also works, but I'm kind of fond of Firefox for this particular use, so use whatever you like there. But you'll also need an editor. Now, we could use Notepad for this kind of thing, but Notepad is pretty dumb when it comes to understanding syntax of things. It's not very savvy. We don't want a super fancy editor, but we'd like something that at least is a little bit sensitive to what it is that we're doing, some context knowledge. I suggest something called Notepad++. You can get it free if you go to the site that's listed here, http://notepad-plus-plus.org. You'll see that if you go there, there are downloads. You can find that you can go get a free download of that. Just get the latest thing, and it's going to work fine for you. Now, there are others that people like, depending on your operating system. Some students have found that something called Atom, A-T-O-M, works nicely for them. So depending on your operating system, you'll want to have something like that. So that's really all the tools that you're going to need to get started with that. And so let's take a quick look at how that will work, and let's get a very basic file created, and then we'll look at how we are going to start with this thing. So the first thing that I'm going to do, let me get rid of this page because I don't need it anymore. We're going to start Notepad++. So let's see, do I have that open now? I don't, so I'm going to escape from here for a minute, and I'm going to start Notepad++. And the first thing that I need to do is to create a file. Now, Notepad++ in the Windows environment certainly is sensitive to what the file extension is. So the first thing that we need to do is actually save the file so that it understands, based on the extension, what kind of file we're going to be doing. So in this case, I'm going to do File, and I'm going to say Save As. I'm going to put it on my desktop, and I'm going to, let's see, what am I going to call it? I'm just going to call it Starter. And then I'm going to choose not a text file, but I want to do a hypertext markup language, HTML file. So I'm going to click on that, and it's going to save it under a thing called starter.html. That's perfect. So I'm going to then save it, and then you'll see it appear here on my desktop. Now, if you are a Windows user, you really should have your Windows set to where it shows those extensions. If you don't know how to do that, you can look it up real quick, but it's a view option, and so if you open any folder, you can go turn that on. I guess I should just show you because it's easier perhaps. You're going to say View, you're going to go to Options over here, you're going to go to View, and then one of the things here, you're going to have a checkbox that says Hide Extensions for Known Types. That should be off. You just don't want that to be on. So I'm going to cancel that because I've already got it, but you'll want to turn that off so that you see the extensions always in your Windows. The next thing is, that's going to say to Notepad++, hey, I'm writing HTML, so that's cool. That's the next place that I want to be. So let's continue the presentation, and let me swap our display so that you get the right stuff here. There we go. So now let's look a little bit at what you're going to need for HTML. HTML is called Hypertext Markup Language. It is not a programming language. It's a way to mark things, mostly for display. You're saying how you want things to look on the screen, where you want them to go, and stuff like that. So it is a way for you to describe those things, and then your browser can turn that into action. So we're going to, we've created the file. Let's look at how we're going to edit and how we're going to load it into a browser and all of that kind of stuff, and also how to back up our work. You want to make sure that you keep control of your programs, and so as you go and develop them, you can keep versions of them so you never lose your work. So that's important stuff. So let's take a brief look at that. And so let me again get out of here, go back to Notepad++, and let's first see how we're going to start writing our basic scripts and what the basic parts of that are going to be. So the first thing that we're going to do at the very top is that we're going to type, we're going to be typing a lot of angle brackets. So those are above your period and comma, so get used to those. I'll call them angle brackets. The first thing that we're going to do is type this. You're going to say exclamation doc type, and then you're going to say HTML. Now you'll notice right away that Notepad++ has some idea of some contexts, and so as I was typing HTML, it starts to provide some autocompletes. If you want to use one of those, it's great. Make sure you know what you're choosing, but hit tab and it'll just automatically select that. What that's going to do is tell whatever program is looking at this file, hey, this is an HTML file specifically. I'm formatting it as an HTML file, so just be aware, process it as an HTML file. That goes at the very top. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to type this. We're going to say meta in angle brackets, and then this is going to be, it's not going to make much sense to you, but we're going to type it anyway. We'll talk about what it means briefly. What this does is this says when you are looking at this file, this is the way that I'm going to encode characters. This is a concept that's kind of beyond us, but what this will do is this will suppress certain errors that we'll see in the browser, and it says, look, you're going to find in this file Unicode characters. If you see characters, that's how I want you to interpret them. Again, the main reason we include it is so we don't get a funny error later. But just type it. The other thing that you should realize is we're going to have this starter HTML file, and we're always going to use it in the future. So you should only have to type this stuff one time, right? You should never have to come back and do it again because you've already got the file, and then you're just going to copy it. All right, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to start our HTML tag. This says, hey, here's a block of HTML that is coming. All right, so this is announcing that fact. Now, most tags in HTML, this is called a tag, it's in angle brackets. Most tags have a start and an end. So you'll notice I'm going to hit enter a couple times, and then I'm going to put /HTML. So this one says this is the top of it, and this one says it's the bottom. Notice in Notepad, if I click on the top one, it highlights the corresponding bottom one, and you'll even see that the little angle brackets say, hey, there's the open, there's the close, so we know it's a complete block. There are a few tags that don't have that. Those are called empty tags, but we won't get into those just yet. So this is getting an HTML block ready, and it's a good habit to put the start and the end right away so that you know what you're doing and that you don't forget to put the end tag. The next thing that we do is there are two main sections of HTML that we can work in. One's called the head, one's called the body. For the moment, it doesn't much matter, but most HTML documents have a body. So what we're going to do is we're going to put body over here. Now, why did I just tab that over, and why did I tab over both the start and end body tag? Well, when you're programming, as when you're writing HTML, when one thing is subordinate to the other thing, when it's a subsection of the other thing, we indent it so that the human eye can see that, so that when you come back and look at this, you'll say, oh, the body is part of the HTML, right? The body block is part of the HTML block. So that's just a thing for the humans. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, a script is coming. Right, so you're going to start a script tag. Now, the stuff that comes after this is going to look a little bit funny, but if we want to be super explicit, we do the following. All right. We have a script tag and a close script tag, and that says to whatever browser is looking at this, so that there is no mistaking, this is a JavaScript script. There might be some other scripting languages that are supported. Now, hardly any are actually going to be in that category. Really, you're going to see JavaScript. So you will see in some cases some abbreviations that don't include the language equals and the type equals. Notice that the format of these, you should see, is very consistent. When you have an attribute, you type the name of the attribute and then an equal sign, and then in quotes you put the value for that attribute. So up here we have the char set attribute and the value for that attribute in quotes. Here we say the language attribute equals, here's the value, the type attribute equals, right? And we put a space in between them. Again, it looks funny, but you're only going to have to type it once, because you should never type it in a second file. You should always start with this file in the future. Next thing that we're going to do, again, is going to be something helpful in some cases, and it seems odd for us now. This is an HTML comment block. It starts with angle bracket, exclamation dash dash, and it ends with slash slash dash dash right angle bracket. Doesn't make any sense to your brain. I'm sorry, it doesn't actually make any sense, period. But that's the way it is. Why do we write this HTML comment block? Well, if you happen to run this thing on an older browser, we're talking about really old, but to be completely available so that this works everywhere, we tend to do this and just leave it in there. This is so that if an old browser that doesn't understand scripting happens to reach this particular area of our code, it will not trip up and try to process this stuff as HTML. So anything that it sees in here, a really old browser will just say, oh, that's just a comment, so I'm just going to ignore it. So again, some of this stuff is more detailed than you'll see in some examples, but if you use this particular setup, it should work in any browser of any age. So we should be safe. Also notice that I've indented again, because now everything that's in here is part of the script. It's subordinate to, or it's part of the script block. So guess what? Now we're ready to actually type some JavaScript code after all of that. Now notice we are still in our starter HTML file. I'm going to save that. Right? Now, if we run this thing now, it's going to work. It's not going to give us any errors, but it's not going to do anything either, because we haven't really said to do anything. So I'm always going to save, and I'm going to show you in a minute how to go test it and see how it's doing, but let's actually write some code first. So our first line of code, document.write. This syntax is, I am working with the web page, right? You're always going to be talking, or almost always going to be talking to a web page, and so that's called the document. And if you want to write on the document, you say, hey, document dot, I want to write on you, and then in parentheses you tell it what you want to write. In this case, we want to write some very specific text, so I'm going to enclose it in quotes, and I'm going to put the words, famous words, hello world. Okay. Why do we put those in quotes? Because those are not things that the language understands. We want it to literally write that word. It's not some special keyword, not some special thing like document or write or script. Or it's not HTML, it's not JavaScript. It's specific text that we want to write onto the page. So we put it in quotation marks to tell JavaScript that it's that literal text I want to write. Now, if we've done everything correctly, we can save, and we want to go run it in our browser. How do we do that? You say run, and then you pick your browser. I'm going to launch it in Firefox, but you can pick something else. Okay, that's going to start the browser, and lo and behold, it says hello world. That's great. Now, for our normal course of business, while you're working, I'm going to show you how I would arrange my desktop. I would put one of the things over to the right, like Notepad. I'm going to slam it over to the right, and I'm going to take the browser and slam it, or sorry, over the Notepad to the left, the browser to the right, either way. And that way, when I'm working, I can do the following workflow. If I change this, like I just changed my wording inside here, I can change it here, I can save it here, then I simply have to come over here and refresh. I can either click my little refresh reload page icon, or I can press F5 or do whatever other keystroke they would let you do, like Control R, but I'm going to press that, and you'll notice that now the new script is run, and the answer is here. So the general workflow is just type here and then edit here, or see the result here, and come back here and do that over and over. So that's the general workflow that you're going to use, and that's how you're going to write a very simple script. Now, the other thing I want to show you is what are we going to do in the future, right? So as I mentioned before, we have our starter HTML here. If you want to create another script, you're going to move on to something else. What I would recommend is you copy and paste that. Right click, copy, right click, paste. And I'm going to call this one my next script. That way, when you open that guy, I'm going to open that in Notepad++, you'll notice I have a copy of my whole thing. And so I can now delete this line and I can start writing some other script, and I'm now working in the next file, and I didn't have to type all that silliness ever again. So that's what I'm reminding you about there, is that you can use that starter file in the future, and it will be super useful for you so that you don't have to type this stuff. So a couple of things to pay attention to. Be careful of the indentation for the humans. Match up the tags, because you sometimes can get unexpected stuff if you don't end the tags properly. The one other thing that I'll show you here, actually, do we want to go that far? I think that's as far as we want to go. That's a pretty good way into the thing. So let's look real briefly then. Let's go back to our slideshow for a second. I will swap that again. And so here's our starter script, and then in the slide deck you will see that there's some annotations that tell you exactly what we're doing at each point there, and hopefully that will be helpful. So that ends our video on writing our first JavaScript. There's a million more things that we're going to learn about it, but that'll get you started, just so that if you're curious and you want to start poking around, that will let you get that far, and it also might give you enough information to write some of your extremely early JavaScripts for the class. So thanks for watching this video. If you have any questions, post on the forum or ask online, or of course when we meet next we can talk about them. Thanks for watching.